somewhere between what we have uncovered and what we still cannot explain, ancient history begins to fracture. Entire structures rise. In places where construction should have been nearly impossible, their geometry too exact, their purpose still debated. Materials endure far longer than expected. Techniques appear without clear origin. And certain sites seem engineered with an understanding of physics that feels strangely advanced. Each excavation adds detail, yet also deepens the mystery, revealing patterns that do not fully align with conventional timelines. If everything we see is only a fragment of a larger system, then the real question is not what ancient civilizations built, but what they truly knew. Across the landscapes of ancient history, there are places that seem less like natural formations and more like thresholds, points where the surface world gives way to something deeper, darker, and far less understood. The Devil's Sinkhole, located in the rugged terrain of Texas Hill Country, is one such place. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a geological anomaly, a massive vertical shaft carved into limestone over thousands of years. But as researchers have examined its depths, subtle clues have emerged, clues that suggest this was not always an untouched void. Instead, it may have been a place where humans once ventured, for reasons that remain disturbingly unclear. Geographically, the sinkhole lies within a karst region shaped by the slow dissolution of limestone, a process that creates caves, voids, and sudden collapses in the Earth's surface. The opening itself is deceptively simple, an abrupt hole in the ground, dropping steeply downward into darkness. Yet beneath that opening is a cavern system that extends far beyond what the eye can see. A vertical world isolated from sunlight, wind, and the rhythms of the surface. In ancient times, this isolation would have made the site both inaccessible and, paradoxically, deeply significant. Cultures across the world have long associated such places with entrances to the underworld, realms of spirits, or zones where the boundary between life and death becomes thin. The modern discovery of the Devil's Sinkhole dates to the 19th century, when settlers and explorers first documented its existence. However, systematic investigation came much later, as speleologists and archaeologists began to explore its interior with more advanced equipment. What they encountered was not a neatly preserved archaeological site, but something far more ambiguous. Within layers of sediment and debris, traces appeared, burned materials, fragments of organic matter, and disturbances in the natural stratigraphy that did not align with purely geological processes. These were not definitive artifacts, but they were enough to raise a profound question. Had humans once entered this place, and if so, how? This question lies at the heart of the sinkhole's enduring mystery. The descent into the Devil's Sinkhole is not gradual. It is a sheer vertical drop, requiring technical skill even by modern standards. For ancient people to access it, they would have needed methods of controlled descent, ropes, ladders, and scaffolding systems, none of which are directly evidenced at the site. Yet the possibility remains that such techniques existed in forms that left no trace, or that access routes once existed but have since collapsed or eroded away. The idea challenges conventional assumptions about the technological limitations of ancient societies, suggesting that their capabilities may have been more sophisticated, or at least more daring, than typically imagined. The environment within the sinkhole adds another layer to the enigma. Conditions below the surface are remarkably stable. temperatures remain relatively constant, light is almost entirely absent, and moisture levels create a microclimate unlike the surrounding landscape. Such conditions can preserve organic material over long periods, but they can also distort or degrade evidence in unpredictable ways. What survives may not tell the full story. What has vanished may have been far more revealing. This dual nature, preservation and erasure intertwined, makes interpretation extraordinarily difficult. It is as though the sinkhole itself resists being understood. Archaeological efforts in and around the site have been cautious and limited, constrained by both the physical challenges of exploration and the ecological importance of the cave system, which serves as a habitat for large bat populations. Even so, the few investigations that have taken place hint at human interaction. Some researchers have proposed that the burned materials found within could be remnants of torches used to illuminate the descent. Others suggest they might result from natural processes, such as lightning-induced fires or chemical reactions within the cave environment. The ambiguity of the evidence leaves room for multiple interpretations, none of which can yet be confirmed. To better understand the significance of the Devil's Sinkhole, it is useful to compare it with other ancient sites where natural voids played a role in human activity. In Mesoamerica, for example, cenotes, natural sinkholes formed in limestone, were used by the Maya for both practical and ritual purposes. Some served as water sources, while others became sacred spaces associated with offerings and, in certain cases, human sacrifice. Artifacts recovered from these cenotes provide clear evidence of intentional use, transforming what might otherwise appear as natural features into culturally meaningful sites. Similarly, in parts of Europe, deep pits and caves have been linked to burial practices and ceremonial activities, reinforcing the idea that vertical spaces were often imbued with symbolic significance. Yet the Devil's Sinkhole differs in a crucial way: its accessibility. Unlike many cenotes, which can be approached via sloping passages or gradual descents, this sinkhole presents a near-vertical barrier. If it was used by ancient people, that use would have required a deliberate confrontation with danger, a willingness to descend into a space where escape was not guaranteed. This raises the possibility that the site held a special kind of meaning, one that justified the risk. Perhaps it was seen as a gateway to another world, a place where communication with unseen forces was possible. Or perhaps it served as a test, or a ritualized journey into darkness from which only certain individuals would return. Several hypotheses attempt to explain the presence of human-related traces within the sinkhole. One suggests accidental entry, individuals or animals falling into the shaft, leaving behind organic remains that later burned or decomposed in unusual ways. Another proposes intentional exploration, with early inhabitants of the region descending out of curiosity or necessity, using rudimentary equipment that has since vanished. A more speculative theory considers ritual use, drawing on cross-cultural parallels to argue that the sinkhole may have functioned as a sacred site, its depth and darkness symbolizing a connection to forces beyond the human realm. Each hypothesis carries its own strengths and weaknesses, but none can fully account for all observed features. What makes the Devil's Sinkhole particularly compelling is not the certainty of its history, but the absence of it. In archaeology, sites are often defined by what they reveal: structures, tools, inscriptions that can be analyzed and interpreted. Here, however, the defining characteristic is ambiguity. The sinkhole offers fragments without context, clues without clear narratives. It invites interpretation, but resists conclusion. In doing so, it occupies a unique space between natural wonder and potential cultural artifact, a place where the boundaries between geology and human history blur. Standing at the edge of the sinkhole today, one can look down into a darkness that seems to absorb not only light, but also explanation. And it is easy to imagine how ancient people might have perceived such a place, not merely as a physical feature, but as something imbued with meaning, perhaps even with power. Whether or not they ever descended into its depths, the possibility alone is enough to challenge our understanding of the past. It suggests that human interaction with extreme environments may have been more complex, more intentional, and more symbolically charged than we often assume. In the end, the Devil's Sinkhole remains what it has always been, a void in the earth, silent and largely inaccessible. Yet within that silence lies a question that continues to echo through the study of ancient history. If traces of human presence truly exist within its depths, then they point to actions that defy easy explanation. Actions that required courage, ingenuity, voice, and perhaps a belief system that placed value on the unknown. And if those traces are instead the result of natural processes, then the sinkhole serves as a reminder of how easily the line between human activity and geological phenomenon can blur. Hidden beyond the grand facades and monumental tombs of Petra, where crowds gather before the treasury and the monastery, there exists a quieter, more elusive landscape, one that does not announce itself with scale, but with silence. The Petra Little Sikh altar sites are carved into narrow sandstone corridors, almost invisible unless one knows where to look. These are not structures built to impress. They are spaces that seem designed to withdraw, to isolate, and perhaps to transform those who entered them. In the broader narrative of the Nabatean civilization, these altars represent one of the least understood yet most evocative elements of their spiritual world. Geographically, the Little Sikh lies just outside Petra's main ceremonial routes, a smaller and less traversed canyon system branching away from the more famous Sikh. Though its walls rise steeply on either side, narrowing into passages where light filters through only at certain hours of the day. Within these confined spaces, the Nabateans carved a series of ritual installations directly into the living rock. Small platforms, shallow basins, steps leading upward to elevated points, and niches cut with deliberate precision. Unlike the grand high place of sacrifice, which commands wide views and accommodates large gatherings, the Little Sikh altars are intimate, almost hidden, embedded in spaces that restrict movement and vision. This contrast alone raises a fundamental question. Why create sacred sites that seem designed to exclude rather than invite? The discovery of these altar sites did not come through a single dramatic excavation, but rather through gradual documentation by archaeologists and explorers mapping Petra's peripheral zones. Early surveys in the 20th century noted the presence of carved features in the Little Sikh, but their significance remained ambiguous. It was only through later, more detailed studies, combining architectural analysis with comparative religious interpretation, that scholars began to recognize these features as components of a ritual landscape. Even so, the absence of inscriptions, artifacts, or clear ceremonial residues has left their function open to interpretation, making them one of Petra's most persistent enigmas. At the heart of the mystery lies the craftsmanship itself. The altars are not crude or incidental carvings. Their surfaces are smoothed with remarkable consistency, their edges defined with a level of control that suggests careful planning rather than spontaneous creation. Some are positioned at heights that would have required scaffolding or advanced climbing techniques, especially within such confined spaces. The sandstone, while softer than many other building materials, still demands skill to shape with precision. Yet there is no obvious evidence of the tools or methods used to achieve this level of refinement in such difficult conditions. The Nabateans were known for their mastery of stone carving and water engineering, but here, in these narrow corridors, that mastery takes on a different character, less about monumentality and more about exact placement within a constrained environment. Equally puzzling is the apparent lack of physical evidence for the rituals themselves. In many ancient altar sites across the Near East, archaeologists find traces of burning, ash deposits, or organic residues associated with sacrifice. In the Little Sikh, such evidence is minimal or entirely absent. Some basins could have held liquids, perhaps water, oil, or wine used in libation rituals. But without residue analysis or preserved materials, this remains speculative. The niches carved into the rock may have held idols or symbolic objects, yet none have survived in situ. This absence of tangible evidence forces researchers to rely on spatial analysis and analogy rather than direct proof, deepening the sense that these sites operated according to a ritual logic that does not easily translate into modern archaeological categories. The arrangement of the altars adds another layer to the mystery. They are not randomly distributed, but appear to follow certain patterns, aligned along pathways, positioned at intervals that suggest progression, and oriented in ways that may correspond to the movement of sunlight through the canyon. At specific times of day, beams of light penetrate the narrow passages, illuminating particular surfaces while leaving others in shadow. It is tempting to imagine that these moments of illumination were integral to the rituals performed each day, transforming the altars into stages where light itself became part of the ceremony. If so, the Little Sikh was not merely a collection of isolated altars, but a carefully orchestrated sequence of experiences, a ritual journey rather than a single destination. When compared to other Nabatean sacred sites, the uniqueness of the Little Sikh becomes even more pronounced. The high place of sacrifice, located on a prominent summit, is expansive and outward-facing, designed for visibility and communal participation. Similar high places across the ancient Near East share these characteristics, emphasizing elevation and openness as markers of divine proximity. In contrast, the Little Sikh reverses this logic. It draws participants inward, into enclosed spaces where the sky is reduced to a narrow strip and the outside world recedes. This inversion suggests the possibility of a different kind of religious practice, one that prioritizes introspection, secrecy, or initiation over public display. Comparable features can be found in other ancient cultures, though rarely in such concentrated form. In certain Egyptian contexts, for example, the temple interiors were designed as progressively restricted spaces, accessible only to priests or initiates. In some Hellenistic mystery cults, participants underwent staged rituals that unfolded in controlled environments, often hidden from the public eye. Yet even these parallels do not fully account for the specific architectural choices seen in the Little Sikh. The integration of natural canyon formations with carved ritual elements creates a hybrid space, part constructed, part inherited from the landscape, suggesting that the Nabateans were not merely building altars, but shaping the environment itself into a sacred instrument. Several hypotheses have been proposed to explain the purpose of these sites. One suggests that they functioned as locations for private or elite rituals, not accessible only to a select group within Nabatean society. Another proposes that they were used for initiation ceremonies, in which participants moved through a sequence of stages, each marked by a different altar, symbolizing a transformation of status or understanding. A third possibility is that these spaces were dedicated to specific deities associated with the natural world, spirits of the rock, the canyon, or the desert, requiring rituals performed in direct contact with the landscape. There is also the possibility that the Little Sikh represents an earlier phase of Nabatean religious practice, one that predates the construction of larger, more formalized sacred sites. Yet none of these hypotheses fully resolves the central question: why here? And why in this way? Why carve precise and deliberate altars into spaces that are difficult to access, limited in visibility, and seemingly devoid of practical function? The answer may lie not in what these sites were used for, but in how they were experienced. The narrowness of the canyon, the controlled entry of light, the physical effort required to move through the space. All of these factors would have shaped the perception of those who entered. In such an environment, even simple actions, climbing a step, placing an offering, standing in a beam of light, could take on heightened significance. The architecture does not merely accommodate ritual, it actively constructs it. Archaeological work in the Little Sikh remains limited compared to Petra's more famous areas, leaving many questions unanswered. Advances in technologies such as residue analysis, 3D mapping, gish and micro-erosion studies may, in time, provide new insights into how these altars were used and when they were created. For now, however, they remain suspended between interpretation and mystery, offering just enough evidence to suggest complexity, but not enough to confirm it. In the end, the Petra Little Sikh altar sites challenge our assumptions about ancient religious spaces. They suggest that not all sacred architecture was meant to be seen, and that some of the most important rituals may have taken place not in grand temples, but in hidden corridors of stone, where light, silence, and movement combine to create experiences that are now almost impossible to reconstruct. They remind us that the past is not only preserved in what is visible and monumental, but also in what is concealed, waiting, perhaps, for a different kind of understanding. Across the vast plains of southern Africa, where dry grasslands stretch toward the horizon and the wind moves quietly across open land, there lies an object that does not belong to Earth. It does not resemble a ruin, a temple, or any known artifact shaped by human hands, and yet in many ways it carries the same aura as the most enigmatic structures of ancient civilizations. It is the Hoba meteorite, a colossal mass of metal from deep space, resting silently where it fell, defying expectations and challenging everything we assume about impacts from the cosmos. Located near the town of Grootfontein in northern Namibia, the Hoba meteorite lies embedded in a shallow depression, not buried, not fragmented, but fully exposed to the sky. Measuring roughly 2.7 by 2.7 meters and about 0.9 meters thick and weighing an estimated 60 tons, it is the largest single meteorite ever discovered on Earth. Unlike most meteorites, which are found in scattered fragments or hidden beneath layers of sediment, Hoba remains intact and visible, as if it had arrived gently rather than violently. The surrounding terrain offers no dramatic clues, no crater, no radial ejecta, no signs of catastrophic disruption. Just a quiet, massive block of iron, sitting where it has rested for thousands of years. The discovery of Hoba in 1920 was not the result of a scientific expedition, but of chance. A local farmer, ploughing his field, struck something unusually hard beneath the soil. Expecting stone, he instead uncovered metal, solid, dense, and unlike anything naturally formed on Earth. Further investigation revealed that this was not a terrestrial object at all, but a visitor from space. Since then, scientists have studied it extensively, attempting to reconstruct its journey and understand the conditions that allowed such a massive body to reach the surface without disintegrating. Its composition is both expected and extraordinary. Like many iron meteorites, Hoba is composed primarily of iron and nickel, with traces of cobalt and other elements. But what sets it apart is the remarkable uniformity of its structure. Under analysis, it reveals a finely balanced crystalline pattern formed over millions of years as molten metal cooled slowly in the vacuum of space. This process suggests that Hoba was once part of the core of a larger planetary body, perhaps a protoplanet or asteroid that was shattered in a long-forgotten collision. In this sense, Hoba is not just a rock, but a fragment of a lost world, or a preserved piece of planetary interior that predates Earth itself. And yet the greatest mystery surrounding Hoba is not its origin, but its arrival. A meteorite of this size should have produced a significant impact crater upon reaching Earth. Even accounting for atmospheric deceleration, a mass of this scale would typically strike the ground with tremendous force. But at the Hoba site, there is no crater, only a shallow indentation in the soil. This absence has puzzled scientists for decades and has led to a range of hypotheses, none of which fully resolve the contradiction. One leading theory suggests that Hoba entered Earth's atmosphere at a very shallow angle, effectively skipping across the upper layers rather than plunging directly downward. Combined with its relatively flat shape, this could have increased air resistance, thus slowing its descent more effectively than a compact spherical object. Over time, it may have lost enough velocity to land without explosive impact. Another possibility is that the meteorite fragmented partially during descent, shedding mass and energy before reaching the ground. However, no significant fragments have been found nearby, raising further questions. There is also the matter of its preservation. Most meteorites exposed to Earth's environment undergo rapid weathering, especially those rich in iron. Yet Hoba shows only limited signs of corrosion. Its surface has developed a stable oxide layer, but the bulk of the mass remains intact and structurally sound. This suggests that the local environmental conditions, low humidity, stable temperatures, and minimal biological activity have played a role in preserving it. Still, and the degree of preservation over such a long period remains unusual. When compared to other large meteorites, Hoba stands alone. The Campo del Cielo meteorite field, for example, consists of numerous fragments scattered across a wide area, each marking a violent breakup during atmospheric entry. Similarly, the Sikhote Alin meteorite, which fell in 1947, produced a dramatic field of craters and iron shards, the result of explosive disintegration. In contrast, Hoba appears almost serene, undivided, undisturbed, and singular. It does not tell a story of destruction, but of improbability. The absence of historical records adds another layer to the mystery. A fall of this magnitude, if witnessed, would likely have been remembered, recorded in oral traditions, myths, or early written accounts. Yet there is no known documentation of such an event in the region. This suggests that the meteorite may have fallen long before human settlement, or at least before the development of enduring cultural memory. Alternatively, if the impact was indeed less violent than expected, it may not have produced the dramatic visual or auditory effects typically associated with meteorite falls. Modern studies, including geochemical analysis and isotopic dating, continue to refine our understanding of Hoba's age and origin. Estimates suggest that it may have fallen between 80,000 and 200,000 years ago, though the exact timing remains uncertain. Its journey through space, however, spans billions of years. Formed in the early solar system, shaped by cosmic collisions, and eventually guided toward Earth by gravitational forces, we are only beginning to fully understand. In many ways, Hoba occupies a unique space between geology and archaeology. It is not a human creation, yet it shares with ancient monuments a sense of permanence, mystery, and silent testimony. It challenges our expectations not through complexity, but through contradiction. A massive object that should have shattered, yet remains whole. A violent event that should have left scars, yet left almost none. A relic of cosmic origin, resting quietly among the landscapes of Earth. And perhaps that is what makes Hoba so compelling. It does not overwhelm with spectacle, but with subtle defiance of the rules. It invites us to reconsider what we think we know, not just about meteorites, but about the processes that shape our planet and the universe beyond. Because if a 60-ton mass of iron can fall from the sky and leave almost no trace of its arrival, then perhaps the boundaries of our understanding are not as solid as we imagine. Cut deep into the volcanic heart of central Anatolia lies a landscape that seems less constructed than uncovered, as if an entire sacred world had been waiting inside the rock for human hands to reveal it. The Ihlara Valley, stretching like a narrow wound across the Cappadocian Plateau, conceals within its steep walls more than 100 rock-cut churches, silent, shadowed, and astonishingly precise. At first glance, they appear as little more than openings in stone. But step inside, and the illusion collapses. These are not caves. They are architectures, designed, measured, and executed with a level of control that challenges everything we assume about early medieval construction. Geographically, the valley was formed through a violent geological past. Millions of years ago, and volcanic eruptions blanketed the region in thick layers of soft tuff. Over time, the Melendez River carved a deep canyon, exposing vertical cliffs of workable stone. It is here, along these sheer walls, that human communities between the 7th and 11th centuries began transforming geology into sanctuary. Unlike cities built upward, Ihlara was built inward. Entire chapels, corridors, domes, and chambers were carved directly into the rock face, often dozens of meters above the valley floor, accessible only by narrow paths or hidden stairways. From above, they remain almost invisible, camouflaged within the natural strata. The discovery of these churches was not a single dramatic event, but rather a gradual unveiling. Local populations had long known of the valley, yet systematic documentation only began in the 19th century, when European explorers and scholars entered Cappadocia and began recording its unusual architecture. What they encountered in Ihlara was different from anything previously catalogued. Unlike freestanding Byzantine churches, these structures possessed no external form. Their design existed entirely within negative space, an absence carved with intention. And it is this method of creation that introduces the first and perhaps most unsettling mystery. Carving a room into rock is one thing, but carving a symmetrical vaulted interior with aligned axes, proportional columns, and spatial harmony is something else entirely. Inside churches such as Archaeological or Sumbulu, ceilings curve into near-perfect domes. Pillars appear to support weight, though they are carved from the same continuous mass. Neat walls meet at angles that suggest premeditated geometry. Yet all of this was achieved in darkness, with limited tools, and without the possibility of external measurement. There are no construction lines, no visible corrections, only finished space. The question emerges almost immediately. How did their builders maintain such precision when working from the inside out, removing material rather than assembling it? Even more enigmatic are the paintings that cover many of these interiors. Frescoes dating back over 1,000 years still cling to the stone. Images of Christ, saints, and symbolic narratives rendered in reds, ochres, and blues. In some chambers, the colors remain vivid, protected from sunlight and weather. In others, they fade into ghostly outlines, suggesting differences in technique or purpose. The pigments bond to the soft volcanic surface in ways that defy easy explanation. Tuff is porous, unstable, and prone to erosion, yet these images endure. What mixtures did these artists use? What preparation allowed the paint to penetrate and fix itself so deeply into the rock? And why do certain churches display stylistic deviations, simplified figures, geometric patterns, or iconography that diverges from orthodox Byzantine conventions? The location of the churches adds another layer to the mystery. They are not positioned for visibility or grandeur. Many are hidden along winding sections of the canyon, accessible only by steep descents or narrow ledges. Some entrances are barely distinguishable from natural cavities. This has led researchers to propose that the valley functioned as a refuge, perhaps for early Christian communities seeking isolation during periods of political or religious tension. Yet the scale complicates this theory. These are not temporary shelters. The number of churches, their distribution, and their internal complexity suggest long-term planning and sustained occupation. It is as if an entire religious landscape was intentionally concealed within the earth. Archaeological investigations throughout the 20th century have attempted to reconstruct the life that once animated these spaces. Excavations have revealed traces of habitation, storage niches, living quarters, and pathways linking different sections of the valley. Some churches appear connected to larger complexes, hinting at organized monastic communities rather than isolated hermits. Carbon dating, stylistic analysis of frescoes, and inscriptions have helped establish a broad timeline, placing the peak of activity between the Middle Byzantine period. Yet many questions remain unresolved. There is no central authority site, no clear hierarchy of construction phases, and no definitive explanation for how labor and resources were coordinated across such a challenging terrain. When compared to other rock-cut traditions, such as the cave monasteries of Cappadocia, the underground cities of Derinkuyu and Kaimaklu, or even the monumental excavations at Petra, Ihlara stands apart in subtle but significant ways. Petra's facades declare themselves outwardly, sculpted for visibility and impact. Derinkuyu descends vertically, and engineered for defense and survival. But Ihlara extends horizontally, weaving architecture along a natural corridor, integrating worship, habitation, and concealment into a single, continuous environment. It is less a city and more a hidden ecosystem, where geology and belief merge seamlessly. Several hypotheses attempt to explain this phenomenon. One suggests that the valley served as a strategic refuge during periods of Arab-Byzantine conflict, its concealed churches offering both spiritual and physical protection. Another proposes that it functioned as a monastic network, where isolation was not a necessity, but a chosen path towards spiritual discipline. A more complex interpretation considers the possibility of layered use, initially as a refuge, later evolving into a structured religious center. Yet none of these fully address the technical sophistication evident in the carvings or the enduring quality of the frescoes. Perhaps the most haunting mystery is not how the churches were created, but why they were ultimately abandoned. There is no clear evidence of destruction, no widespread burning, no collapse, no definitive marker of sudden departure. Instead, the valley seems to have been slowly emptied. Footsteps faded, rituals ceased, paintings remained unfinished. Over time, nature reclaimed the silence. The river continued its quiet erosion, and the entrances, once known, became obscured. Across the vast silence of the American desert, where heat distorts the horizon and time itself seems to slow, there exists a place where stones appear to defy the most basic laws of nature. At Racetrack Playa, heavy rocks lie scattered across a dry lake bed, each one trailing a long, deliberate path behind it, as if it had once chosen to move, slowly and purposefully, across the barren ground. There are no footprints, no signs of human interference, no visible force acting upon them. Only the stones and the silent records of their movement etched into the earth. For decades, this phenomenon has stood as one of the most haunting natural mysteries ever documented, one that feels less like geology and more like a message waiting to be understood. Geographically, Racetrack Playa sits in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Located deep within Death Valley, the playa is a perfectly flat expanse of hardened mud, formed by the periodic evaporation of a shallow lake that appears only after rare rainfall. The surface, when dry, becomes smooth and cracked like ancient pottery, creating an ideal canvas upon which any disturbance is preserved with extraordinary clarity. Mountains rise on either side, channeling winds through the valley, while temperatures swing between extremes, from freezing nights to blistering days. It is precisely this combination of isolation, climate, and geological structure that sets the stage for a phenomenon so rare that it went unobserved in real time for nearly a century. The first documented reports of the moving rocks date back to the early 20th century, when explorers and scientists began to notice strange trails stretching behind otherwise ordinary stones. Some of these trails extended for dozens of meters, curving gently or sharply as if guided by an unseen hand. The rocks themselves varied in size and weight, some small enough to lift, others weighing over several dozen kilograms, yet all seemed capable of movement. Early observers were baffled. No animal tracks accompanied the stones. No evidence suggested that flooding had carried them. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the trails often pointed in different directions, even when the rocks had started close together. It was as if each stone had followed its own path, guided by forces that could not be seen or measured. As scientific interest grew, Racetrack Playa became a site of repeated investigation, and researchers mapped the positions of stones, catalogued trail patterns, and attempted to correlate movement with weather conditions. Yet for decades, no one actually witnessed the rocks in motion. The phenomenon occurred too slowly, too rarely, and under conditions too specific to be easily observed. This absence of direct evidence allowed speculation to flourish. Some suggested powerful desert winds could push the stones, though calculations showed that wind alone was insufficient to move the heaviest rocks. Others proposed magnetic anomalies beneath the playa, or subtle seismic vibrations. More imaginative theories even hinted at unknown natural energies or phenomena yet to be discovered. In the absence of answers, the mystery deepened. What made Racetrack Playa particularly compelling, especially when viewed through the lens of ancient mysteries, was not just the movement itself, but the precision and variation of the trails. Some paths were remarkably straight, stretching across the playa like lines drawn with intention. Others curved gracefully, as though the stones had adjusted course mid-journey. In some cases, rocks appeared to rotate, leaving twisted or looping tracks behind them. There were even instances where stones traveling in parallel suddenly diverged, each veering in a different direction despite sharing the same starting conditions. These patterns echoed a kind of controlled motion, reminiscent of engineered systems rather than random natural processes. To many observers, and it felt as though the desert floor was recording a choreography whose rules were hidden from view. A breakthrough finally came in the early 21st century, when a team of scientists installed GPS trackers and time-lapse cameras across the playa. After years of waiting, the conditions aligned. During cold winter nights, a thin layer of water would accumulate on the surface, freezing into sheets of ice. As morning sunlight warmed the ground, these sheets began to fracture into large floating panels. Then, driven by gentle winds, far weaker than previously assumed necessary, the ice panels slowly pushed against the rocks. The stones, resting on a thin layer of slick mud, began to slide. Movement was subtle, almost imperceptible in real time, mere centimeters per second. But over the course of minutes or hours, it was enough to create the long trails that had puzzled observers for generations. For the first time, the rocks were seen to move. And yet, even with this explanation, Racetrack Playa does not fully surrender its mystery. The precise combination of conditions required — standing water, freezing temperatures, fragile ice sheets, and steady wind — occurs only rarely, sometimes with years between events. The movements themselves are quiet, slow, and easily missed without continuous monitoring. More intriguingly, not all observed trail patterns are perfectly explained by this mechanism. Variations in direction, sudden changes in movement, and the differing behaviors of stones under seemingly identical conditions suggest that additional factors may still be at play. The playa, in a sense, has revealed its method, but not all of its secrets. When compared to other natural phenomena, Racetrack Playa occupies a unique position. There are no widely known equivalents where heavy objects move across flat terrain in such a visible and traceable way. While ice-driven motion has been observed in other environments, the clarity and permanence of the trails here elevate the phenomenon into something almost symbolic. In the context of ancient mysteries, it offers a powerful reminder that even in the modern world, with all its instruments and data, nature is still capable of producing effects that appear deliberate, structured, and profoundly enigmatic. Much like the precisely cut stones of ancient civilizations or the unexplained engineering feats scattered across the globe, the moving rocks of Racetrack Playa challenge our assumptions about what is possible and what remains to be understood. Ultimately, Racetrack Playa stands at the intersection of science and wonder. It is a place where explanation does not diminish mystery, but transforms it. What was once attributed to the unknown is now partially understood, yet no less captivating. The stones still move, the trails still form, and the desert still keeps its silence. In that silence, a question lingers, one that echoes far beyond this remote valley. If such subtle forces can create patterns that mimic intention, how many other mysteries, ancient or modern, are waiting to be reinterpreted, not as impossibilities, but as truths we have yet to fully see? Rising abruptly from the dry plains of central Mali, the Bandiagara escarpment stretches for nearly 150 kilometers, a wall of sandstone that seems to divide two worlds, one below, open and exposed, and one above, hidden within the stone itself. Along this immense cliff face, suspended between sky and earth, are hundreds of ancient structures, granaries, dwellings, and burial chambers carved into ledges so narrow and so high that they appear unreachable. At first glance, they resemble natural formations, shadows etched into rock. But on closer inspection, they reveal something far more unsettling: a human presence where none should logically exist. The people who inhabit the region today, the Dogon, have lived along the base and plateau of the escarpment for centuries. Their villages, built of sun-baked mud and thatch, follow a rhythm shaped by wind, heat, and seasonal rains. Yet even they acknowledge that the most inaccessible structures embedded in the cliffs were not built by them, but by an earlier people known as the Telem, a civilization that has left behind almost no written record, only silent architecture clinging to impossible heights. According to Dogon oral tradition, the Telem were small, agile, and capable of extraordinary movement along vertical surfaces. Some stories go further, describing them as beings who could fly, a phrase that may conceal either advanced climbing techniques or a cultural memory distorted by time. The mystery begins not with what remains, but with how it came to be. Many of the Telem structures are located dozens of meters above the ground, but tucked into cavities that cannot be reached without modern climbing equipment. There are no visible pathways, no carved staircases, no remnants of scaffolding. Even today, accessing some of these sites requires ropes, harnesses, and specialized gear. Yet centuries ago, these same locations were not only reached, but carefully constructed. Mud brick granaries were shaped and sealed. Burial chambers were hollowed out and filled. Openings were aligned with precision, suggesting intent rather than improvisation. The question is unavoidable. How did a pre-industrial society transport materials, tools, and human bodies to such extreme elevations, and do so repeatedly across generations? Archaeological investigations have attempted to answer this, but the evidence remains fragmentary. And excavations of cliffside burial sites have uncovered human remains, textiles, wooden artifacts, and pottery, many remarkably well preserved due to the dry climate and the protective nature of the rock overhangs. Some of these remains date back several centuries before the arrival of the Dogon, confirming that the Telem were indeed a distinct cultural group. Yet beyond these physical traces, there is little to reconstruct their society. No inscriptions, no clear settlements at ground level, no large-scale infrastructure that would explain how such a vertical way of life was sustained. One of the most striking aspects of the Bandiagara dwellings is the apparent defiance of environmental logic. In most ancient societies, settlements were built near water sources, fertile land, and accessible routes. Here, the opposite seems true. The highest and most inaccessible points were chosen deliberately. One prevailing theory suggests defense, that the Telem sought refuge from conflict or slave raids, retreating into the cliffs as a natural fortress. Another proposes environmental adaptation, arguing that the elevation protected against seasonal flooding or extreme heat. But neither explanation fully accounts for the sheer difficulty of daily life at such heights. Living there would have required constant climbing, limited mobility, and a level of physical endurance that challenges even modern climbers. The burial practices add another layer of complexity. Many of the cliff cavities contain human remains placed in positions that suggest ritual care. Bodies were not simply hidden or discarded. They were elevated, positioned, and sometimes accompanied by objects of significance. In several cases, the placement of these burials is so remote that even reaching them today is a calculated risk. This has led to a widely discussed hypothesis that the Telem believed in elevating the dead closer to the sky, perhaps as part of a cosmological system that linked height with spiritual proximity. Yet this interpretation raises further questions. If these locations were sacred, how were they accessed during ceremonies? Were there temporary structures, ladders, ropes, scaffolds that have long since vanished without trace? Or did the Telem possess techniques, now lost, that allowed them to move vertically with far greater efficiency than we can currently imagine? When the Dogon people arrived in the region, likely around the late medieval period, and they did not attempt to replicate the highest cliff dwellings. Instead, they built at the base and on more accessible terraces, adapting the environment to suit agriculture and communal life. However, they continued to use some of the existing cliff structures, particularly for storage and burial. Over time, their own cultural systems became intertwined with the landscape, giving rise to one of the most complex cosmological traditions in West Africa. The Dogon are widely known for their symbolic architecture, ritual spaces, and oral knowledge systems, including controversial claims about their awareness of celestial bodies such as Sirius B. While modern scholarship debates the accuracy of these claims, the association has contributed to the enduring aura of mystery surrounding the region. Thus, in comparison to other ancient cliff dwellings around the world, such as the ancestral Puebloan sites of Mesa Verde in North America or the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia, the Bandiagara escarpment stands apart in both scale and vertical extremity. While Mesa Verde structures are built into alcoves that are relatively accessible via carved paths, and Lalibela's architecture is carved downward into rock, the Telem constructions occupy positions that seem deliberately chosen for their inaccessibility. They are not hidden, they are elevated beyond reach. This distinction is critical. It suggests not just adaptation to environment, but a cultural preference for vertical separation from the ground, from danger, or perhaps from the ordinary human realm. Despite decades of study, the core mystery remains unresolved. The Telem appear in the archaeological record, leave behind structures that challenge practical explanation, and then disappear. There is no clear evidence of assimilation, no definitive signs of violent displacement, and no written history to mark their transition. They simply fade, leaving their dwellings suspended in stone as silent testimony. The Dogon inherit the landscape, but not the methods. The techniques, whatever they were, do not continue. Today, the Bandiagara cliff-dwelling complex is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, both for its cultural significance and its architectural uniqueness. Yet even with modern tools, drones, and climbing equipment, researchers continue to uncover new details that raise as many questions as they answer. Each cavity, each structure, and each fragment of pottery or bone contributes to a larger puzzle, one that resists a single, coherent explanation. What remains most striking is not just the ingenuity required to build these dwellings, but the intention behind them. These were not accidental constructions or temporary shelters. They were deliberate, repeated, and embedded within a system of life and death that placed value on elevation, isolation, and permanence. In a landscape defined by exposure, the Telem chose the most extreme form of refuge imaginable, not by retreating into the earth, but by ascending into it. And so the Bandiagara cliffs endure, holding within their walls a question that has yet to be fully answered. Were these structures the result of extraordinary adaptation, or do they represent a level of knowledge, of engineering, of movement, of environment that has since been lost to time? High in the Paro Valley of Bhutan, where the Himalayas rise in layered silhouettes and clouds drift low enough to touch the earth, the ruins of Drukgyal Dzong emerge and disappear with the shifting mist. At first glance, it appears to be just another abandoned fortress, stone walls fractured by time, courtyards overtaken by silence. But as the fog thickens and thins, the structure seems almost deliberate in its concealment, as if it was never meant to be fully seen. Drukgyal Dzong is not merely a ruin. It is a puzzle suspended between geography, engineering, and forgotten intention. Built in the 17th century to commemorate a decisive victory over Tibetan forces, the fortress stood as both a military stronghold and a symbolic threshold, marking Bhutan's northern frontier. Its position was not arbitrary, though the site sits at the convergence of mountain passes that once served as the primary routes between Bhutan and Tibet. From its vantage point, one can survey the valley below while remaining shielded by steep terrain and unpredictable weather above. Even today, visibility around the ruins can collapse within minutes as alpine mist rolls in, transforming the landscape into a shifting veil of grey. This environmental condition, while natural, raises a question that continues to intrigue historians. Was the fortress placed here simply because of geography, or because of something more strategic? Something that leveraged nature itself as a defensive tool? The structure itself reflects a sophisticated understanding of terrain. Unlike many fortresses built on flat or gently elevated ground, Drukgyal Dzong clings to a sloped mountainside. Now its walls are not laid out in simple linear symmetry, but instead step and adapt to the contours of the land, creating a layered defensive system that feels almost organic. Thick stone ramparts anchor into the earth, forming terraces that absorb both gravitational pressure and the seasonal stresses of the Himalayan climate. There is no evidence of modern reinforcement techniques, yet the remaining sections have endured centuries of erosion, seismic activity, and harsh winters. The question is not simply how it was built, but how its builders calculated stability in an environment where even small misjudgments could lead to collapse. For nearly 3 centuries, Drukgyal Dzong functioned as a living fortress, a center of administration, and a guardian of the northern approach. Then, in the mid-20th century, a fire swept through the structure, leaving it in ruins. What followed is perhaps the most perplexing chapter of its history. Rather than being rebuilt or repurposed, the fortress was left in a state of arrested decay. In a region where strategic locations are rarely abandoned, Drukgyal Dzong became an anomaly, a site frozen in time, neither fully restored nor entirely forgotten. For decades, it stood untouched, its broken walls slowly blending into the mountain itself. This prolonged abandonment raises a deeper question. Was it simply a consequence of circumstance, or was there an unspoken decision to preserve the site exactly as it was, as if its ruin held meaning equal to its former function? Archaeological attention to Drukgyal Dzong has been limited compared to more prominent sites across Asia, yet the studies that have been conducted reveal a complex internal layout. The fortress is not a single enclosed structure, but a network of interconnected spaces, courtyards, corridors, defensive towers, and hidden passages. Movement through the site is anything but straightforward. Pathways narrow unexpectedly, angles shift without warning, and sight lines are carefully controlled. From certain positions, defenders could observe approaching threats without being seen themselves, while intruders would find themselves disoriented by the maze-like design. This complexity suggests a level of planning that goes beyond basic fortification, hinting at an architectural philosophy centered on psychological as well as physical defense. And when compared to other fortifications of the same era, whether the massive stone citadels of Central Asia or the symmetrical castles of Europe, Drukgyal Dzong stands apart. European fortresses often emphasize geometric clarity and open lines of sight, while many Asian strongholds prioritize imposing scale and centralized authority. Drukgyal, by contrast, feels adaptive and irregular, shaped as much by the mountain as by human intention. Its design shares some conceptual parallels with other Himalayan dzongs, such as those found throughout Bhutan, where religious and administrative functions coexist within fortified walls. Yet even among these, Drukgyal's positioning and apparent reliance on environmental concealment make it unique. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the site lies in its dual identity, and within its defensive walls once existed spaces dedicated to spiritual practice, areas for ritual, meditation, and the expression of Vajrayana Buddhist philosophy. This blending of martial and spiritual functions is not uncommon in Bhutanese architecture, but at Drukgyal Dzong, the integration appears especially deliberate. It suggests that the fortress was not only a place of defense, but also a symbolic boundary between worlds, the physical and the metaphysical, the known and the unknown. Such a perspective reframes the structure entirely. Instead of being just a military installation, it becomes a landscape of meaning, where every wall and corridor may have served both practical and symbolic purposes. Several hypotheses attempt to explain the enduring mysteries of Drukgyal Dzong. One proposes that its location was chosen specifically to exploit the natural fog patterns of the region, effectively rendering the fortress invisible from a distance during critical moments. Another suggests that the irregular layout was designed to confuse and disorient attackers, creating a defensive advantage that relied on perception rather than sheer force. A more philosophical interpretation considers the possibility that the fortress was intentionally left in ruins as a reflection of impermanence, a core concept in Buddhist thought, transforming it from a functional structure into a lasting reminder of the transient nature of power and victory. Yet none of these explanations fully resolves the questions the site presents. The precision required to build on such terrain, the decision to abandon a strategically vital stronghold, in the interplay between visibility and concealment, and the fusion of spiritual and military design all point to a level of intention that is not easily categorized. Drukgyal Dzong resists simple narratives. It is neither entirely understood nor completely mysterious, existing instead in a space where evidence and interpretation overlap. Today, as restoration efforts have begun to stabilize parts of the structure, the ruins remain enveloped in the same alpine mist that has always defined them. Visitors who approach the site often describe a sense of disorientation, not just physical, but temporal, as if stepping into a place where past and present coexist without clear boundaries. The fortress does not reveal itself all at once. It emerges in fragments, a wall here, a tower there, and each piece briefly visible before being reclaimed by the fog. In this way, Drukgyal Dzong continues to function much as it always has, not as a static monument, but as an active participant in its environment. It hides, reveals, and transforms, challenging those who encounter it to question not only what they see, but what remains unseen. And perhaps that is its greatest mystery of all, that even in ruin, it still controls the narrative, allowing only glimpses of a past that refuses to be fully uncovered.